Well, today we're going to focus on cystic fibrosis. It's the #1 killer of young adults.
From KSL Television Channel 5, this is Focus.
It's time now for our phone poll question, and today's question has nothing to do with today's Focus discussion on cystic fibrosis. But we'd like to know what you think about commercials in movie theaters. It used to be you'd watch commercials only on television and rarely see one in the theater. Well, all that's changing. Sponsors are finding people who pay $5 to $7 for a movie ticket resent watching commercials before a movie. On the other hand, many of the commercials are becoming mini-movies themselves, and some people like to watch them. What do you think about all of this? Should commercials be shown in movie theaters? If you think they should, call us at 575-7750. If not, 575-7751. And now let's get an idea of what's ahead in today's news from Shelley.
One man is dead. 2 others are injured after an overnight fire swept through this duplex. Fire investigators say transients may have started the blaze. Salt Lake detectives say they've broken a gambling ring that may have been operating for more than a year. And there's a new battle plan to beat the gypsy moth. We'll tell you about it in just a minute. First, our focus topic.
What do you know about cystic fibrosis?
We'll look at this lethal genetic disorder next on Focus.
Well, do you like seeing commercials at the theater, movie theater that is, or does it bother you? Take a second, please, and vote on today's phone poll question. It is this: should commercials be shown in movie theaters? If you think they're okay and should be shown, call us at 575-7750. If not, if you don't like them, 575-7751 is the number to call. And now let's begin our focus discussion on cystic fibrosis. Joining me now are 3 people who live with cystic fibrosis every day. Margaret Sundstrom is the mother of 2 children with cystic fibrosis, one of whom has died. Charles Stockdale and Katie Hardy also join us, and they suffer from cystic fibrosis. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us this morning. First of all, what's it like for you, Mrs. Sundstrom? It's a little different. You've had 4 children with the disease.
Yes.
2 have already died, correct?
No,
one has died.
One, and I have a 15-year-old now.
Okay, what is that like for your family?
Well, it's a pretty frustrating thing for a child to be born knowing they're suddenly different, and then as they mature old enough to realize the real severity of the disease, you know, and know that they're going to pass away.
How do you approach life then, maybe differently than someone else might, given that fact?
Well, I think you realize how important they are. Maybe you're a little more careful, or at least you try to be. Sometimes you're not, but you try to make every minute important, and you try to let them know that you love them.
So that you try to concentrate on making the quality of life better now.
Yes.
Because you know the time is shorter
Yes.
than what others might have.
Yes.
Did you ever give any thought, knowing that it carried on in your family, that you might not have any more children after the first diagnosis? Was that a consideration?
Yes, it was.
How did you deal with that?
Well, my oldest son was born free of CF. We didn't even know about CF when he was born. And then our little gal came, Valerie, and she was diagnosed at birth that she had CF. At that point, we had determined maybe we would not have any more children.
This is a picture of your family now that we're seeing on the,
Yes,
on the screen, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then from that point, you decided what?
We waited a while, and then we had Stephen, our 3rd child, and we just really loved children, and the children wanted children. You know, Mommy, we need another baby, and we were a family that loved being a family, and we kept thinking, okay, 1 out of 4 is the odds they give you. We'll try one more, you know. And
so there were tough decisions. There were considerations that
is.
had to be made.
It is.
Okay. Charles, you live with it every day.
Yes.
How is it for you? How is life different for you maybe than for somebody else who doesn't have cystic fibrosis?
Well, you take in consideration that your lifespan will be shorter than an average person, so you make the best of it, and you have probably a stronger will towards life, and a real zest for making everything a good thing.
On the other hand, do you have periods of depression that you have to deal with as well?
There are occasions that you have a little depression, but through Utah we have a lot of people that have CF that are around the same age, and they kind of help everybody out.
What is CF, cystic fibrosis? Explain in a nutshell maybe what it is.
A genetic disorder which affects your digestive system and your pulmonary system. And with your pulmonary system, that's buildup of mucus or phlegm in the lungs, which just progresses till you can't breathe.
Katie Hardy, how's it affected your life? You live with it as well.
It's make things difficult. There's a lot of time that I spend doing health care that I would rather be doing other things.
Does it, how does it affect your daily life as far as side effects are concerned? Do you tire easily, shortness of breath, things of that nature? What are they?
Shortness of breath, tire easily, low energy level.
Do you too also have, as Charles pointed out, a better zest for life maybe that someone might not have with it?
I think so.
How do you handle the periods of depression that you must go through?
I have a husband and a little girl that's almost 4, and they really help me through.
How does it affect other family members? How do people respond to this? I mean, obviously it affects you directly, but indirectly affecting others. Charles?
It depends on the family. Some family members, I think, try to ignore it, ignore the obvious that you're going to die earlier than anybody else. And so they kind of seem kind of like a facade around you. And then the other families that are really caring, they actually rub off on other people too.
When you first found out that you were diagnosed with it, what was your reaction, and how did you decide to deal with it after that? Katie?
I was 2 when I was diagnosed, so I more or less
You've
grew
lived
up
with it all your life.
Mm-hmm.
When you found out, when you discovered and were old enough to understand that you'd have a shorter lifespan, how did you decide to deal with that?
I think I went through a period of depression, and I was kind of a wild teenager trying to pretend like it wasn't there. I didn't take care of myself. And
Charles, how about for you?
I was also diagnosed really early, and I didn't really have any side effects until I was 16. And then it was pretty hard to be 16, a teenager, and then have something hard hit you.
Margaret, for your children the same thing? Were they diagnosed at a very early age?
Yes, my oldest daughter was diagnosed at birth, and so they grow up just this is what you do. My second daughter was diagnosed at 5. We had her diagnosed at birth, and the test was negative. And those tests that early are not always real accurate, and so she started to have problems at 5, and we had her tested again.
As a parent, how do you handle telling a child, helping them cope with it and telling them about the disease and telling them that they might not live as long as maybe some of their friends might? How do you handle that?
It's really difficult, but it's interesting, I think, that these young people with the disease have a lot more strength than the families do, and sometimes they're the ones that help you cope.
At any point, did you decide, Margaret, maybe that it was now is the time, or, I mean, how did you determine at what point that it was good to talk to the child about it, right from the onset?
Well, yeah, Kelly was old enough at 5 that when we were having tests taken, she knew. And she knew that Valerie had CF. When you start pumping 20 pills a day in a child at the time they're old enough to swallow a pill, which is lots earlier than most children, they pretty well know when you're having to do therapy on them every day. These things just almost are a second nature type of thing.
And they learn to live with it right from the get-go.
Right.
We need to pause for a moment. When we come back, we're going to continue our discussion this morning on cystic fibrosis. As we learn more about the disease, we're going to talk about the clinical definitions and exactly what cystic fibrosis is. Please stay with us.
Today, we want to know what you think about movies and commercials. Do you mind seeing an advertisement before a movie begins? Please take just a second to vote on our phone poll question. Should commercials be shown in movie theaters? If you think it's okay, call 575-7750. But if you don't, call 575-7751. Earlier this year, one victim of cystic fibrosis received a lung transplant. Ed Yates has the story.
It began in 1987 in this small room at the University of Utah Hospital. A group of young cystic fibrosis patients posted a plea for the ultimate Christmas gift, a message to the world shared by all victims of CF. Lisa Carpenter was among them. The following year, she carried the torch for the group when she left for Canada to pick up her gift, a life-saving double lung transplant. She's been there now a discouraging 18 months, but today she finally called her father and husband in Utah. The gift has finally arrived.
She said, this is it. I'm getting my lungs. I'm in the hospital. They're doing the blood test right now.
Jay Carpenter and Lisa's father, Russell Perry, rushed to the airport this morning. At this hour now, the transplant surgery is well underway.
Well, it's overwhelming, to say the least. The wait's been long, and so we've experienced every possible emotion. But this morning when I heard, I couldn't believe it.
Those young patients that staged that harmless protest back in 1987 hope and pray Lisa will make it now, especially as a tribute to 3 members of the group who ran out of time. 13-year-old Joanne King, 18-year-old James Brightenbaker, and 21-year-old Tina McKendrick are gone now, but the bond of friendship Lisa remembers is still very much alive. Lisa said it in 1988, and for the remaining survivors, it's still the same in Canada tonight.
And I love you all, and I hope I'll be home soon.
Ed Yates, Eyewitness News, Salt Lake City.
What causes cystic fibrosis and what advances are researchers making? Joining me now is Dr. Dennis Nielsen, the director of the Cystic Fibrosis Clinic at the University of Utah. Also joining us this morning is Karen Elliott, who is a social worker. She spends a lot of her time helping victims and their families. First, Dr. Nielsen, update us on Lisa's condition. She's getting along all right?
Well, last we heard, she's doing quite well. She was in the ICU for a number of days and is now out and moving around and recovering quite nicely.
Once she has a lung transplant, that cures part of the problem. She continues with cystic fibrosis, but she's just had that part of the body that's been affected repaired. Is that correct?
That's right. As far as we know, once the lungs are transplanted, the cystic fibrosis no longer directly affects the lungs. However, it still affects many organs in the body. The gastrointestinal tract, the pancreas, which is the organ that secretes insulin, among other things, eventually wears out. There are problems with reproduction, with a whole variety of things that happen to kids with cystic fibrosis. One of the problems that transplant patients have is that they continue to have a chronic sinusitis, chronic infection in the sinuses. And the organisms there are the same ones that used to infect her lungs, and she will be at risk for having that and get down into her lungs and infect the new lungs. And that's one of the risks with this procedure in CF.
I suspect, Ms. Nelson, one of the problems is, from your perspective as being a social worker with these people, is that there are so many ongoing medical problems.
That's right. But one of the big issues is that their lifespan, has increased due to antibiotics and more effective antibiotics and various therapies that are used. And so it tends to, the average lifespan, Dennis, about how long ago was about 15?
Well, probably 20 years ago.
And
the lifespan was age 15?
Right.
And what is it now?
And so the average is 21 now. And of course, there are many that live far beyond that. And so the normal choices of life, like career, family, children, are all more within the making. And they have these young people are dealing with a shorter lifespan, and what am I going to do with my life? And so in dealing day by day, we hope to,
hard issues for a young person.
Just like Charlie was saying, he's certainly an example. He's gone ahead with his education, he's working, and he's fulfilled every day. And Katie has her family. And so things are pretty good.
So life goes on a day-by-day basis. Dr. Nelson, put in a nutshell for us. Help us understand the medical condition of cystic fibrosis, what it is, what causes this. Give us a little education here.
All right. Well, first of all, it's a genetic disorder, and it's what's called...
Meaning it's passed on from...
Passed on from your parents, and it's what's called an autosomal recessive disorder, which means that the person who carries one of these defective genes has absolutely no abnormalities. There's no way to know by your health. You have no health problems virtually. And you have to be unlucky enough to be born with 2 of these genes, of the cystic fibrosis genes, in order to have CF. And that works out if you have 2 parents who are carriers, 1 out of 4 children, or the risk for each child is 1 out of 4.
But you have to have both parents have that
That's
recessive gene in order for the child
That's
to
right.
get. One parent isn't enough?
That's right. And especially among Caucasians, it's an extremely common problem. 1 out of 20 Caucasians is a carrier of the cystic fibrosis gene. And it's less common in other ethnic groups, blacks, Hispanics, quite a bit less common in Orientals.
Well, how does one know that you have it unless you have a chromosome workup, I guess? Or do you?
Well, It isn't really practical to test everyone in the population right now for cystic fibrosis. We did have an incredible breakthrough about a year ago where the gene that causes cystic fibrosis has actually been isolated. And what was discovered was the most common form of the CF gene accounts for 70% of the CF genes in the population. There's another 30% of the problem that it turns out has become extremely complex, and it appears that there may well be over 100 different types of cystic fibrosis genes in this smaller group, the less common form. So it's becoming a very complicated medical problem in terms of being able to isolate all the genes, being able to screen the population. Right now, it's possible to screen for the main type, the most common gene.
There is no real cure, only treatments, as you say, to increase the lifespan. Is that correct?
That's right. All we do now is, as I think was previously mentioned, the lungs tend to have very sticky mucus in them. We do chest physiotherapy where the parents usually will pound on the child's chest several times a day to try to help them get rid of this mucus. They're encouraged to cough. They're encouraged to exercise. Those things all help. When the lungs become infected, which is a secondary effect, their immune system is normal. It's just that the secretions get stuck and eventually you do get an infection. We use antibiotics, sometimes very prolonged courses of antibiotics, very powerful antibiotics. A number of our patients have lines, central lines that go in right in near the heart so that we can deliver the antibiotics for long periods of time.
We need to take a break here, but when we return, we'll take your questions. We're talking today about cystic fibrosis. Give us a call. Our phone number is 575-7469. KSL Show. Focus. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Focus today. We're talking about cystic fibrosis, and if you have a question or a comment, a story to share with us, our phone number is 575-7469.
And we'd like to reintroduce you to our guest this morning. Dr. Dennis Nielsen, the director of the Cystic Fibrosis Clinic at the University of Utah, is with us this morning. Seated next to him, Karen Elliott. She is a social worker. She works with people who have cystic fibrosis. Also in this segment, again, Charles Stockdale and Katie Hardy. They both have cystic fibrosis. Dr. Nielsen, realistically, how far away could you say we are from making dramatic gains in how we treat cystic fibrosis?
Well, we're not very far away. The discovery of the gene and a better understanding of the cellular defect has a lot of people working very hard on new treatments, and we expect that within 5 to 10 years the treatment will be dramatically different. Of course, it will take us virtually a lifetime to know how effective those treatments are. And once we see patients dying of old age, we will know that we've done our job and that we've really
But it's a major advancement to have identified those genes and...
Oh, absolutely. The identification of the CF gene was a major breakthrough in medical research. It was the first time a gene like this had been actually isolated by a technique called reverse genetics.
So down the road, people with CF could maybe expect to live longer.
Oh, absolutely. The lifespan with the simple things that we know how to do now have increased dramatically over the years, and we expect that we'll be able to come up with some things that will make, again, major changes in how long people with cystic fibrosis live.
Let's take a phone call from one of our viewers. Go ahead. You're on Focus this morning.
Yes, I was just wondering if this is something that, is diagnosed at birth, or can it develop later in life? Is somebody always born with these genes, or does it develop later?
Good question. Dr. Nielsen?
Well, you're born with the genes, and the disease is not always apparent right at birth. We have, for example, one lady who is now 43 who wasn't diagnosed until she was 25, who has a very mild form of cystic fibrosis. Most children are diagnosed under year of age because of the gastrointestinal problems, which consist of chronic diarrhea, malabsorption, poor growth, and this is picked up very quickly and responds well to replacement of the pancreatic enzymes, which is the main problem.
Charles and Katie, were you both aware since you were very small that you had cystic fibrosis? You weren't? What about you, Charles?
Yeah, my parents I always knew I had something. They treated me differently than my sister. I don't know, I was, all that kid, but the whole family did, so I always kind of assumed that something was not all there. And then later, just going in to see the doctor, we go into our CF clinic about once a year for a routine checkup. And that's when I started learning.
How does it make both of you feel now when you hear Dr. Nielsen talk about the dramatic progress that could be made, especially within, say, 5-10 years? How do you respond to that when you hear that?
Katie, what about you?
Real hopeful. But also, on the other hand, we're trying to hang on for that long.
So hopeful but tempered a little bit with realism of the disease?
Do you have to be really careful that you don't pick up any germs, if you will? Do you feel sort of vulnerable to illnesses?
I try to be, yeah. Whenever my little girl picks up anything, it comes straight to me.
Let's take another phone call. We have a viewer who has a question or a comment. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering, do cysts have any effect on the cystic fibrosis? I have like outbreaks of these.
Does what?
Of cysts.
Cysts.
I have them throughout my body, and I have like an outbreak of them. And I wonder if that was some type of form or maybe not.
The term cystic fibrosis really refers to changes in the lungs where the lungs become damaged. It's very much like emphysema. And when you look at a chest x-ray, you see these areas of the lung that look like cystic changes. And they're not cysts like you get sometimes under the skin in various parts of your body. So it has nothing to do with that.
Two entirely different things.
Completely different.
Karen, when you deal with people who have cystic fibrosis, what is the number one thing you have to talk to them about? What is the biggest problem that they face?
I think the shortened lifespan and dealing with the chronic illness, being ill, a lot of times having to miss a lot of school, a lot of work, and so on and so forth, is really a big issue. Some people tend to be so positive that they're driven, to a point, and they don't want to accept the possibility of Social Security disability or something like that. And then there are other people that are fearful of taking a step in. A lot of times, in Charlie and I have kind of had a discussion about, a lot of times sometimes what I think might be the most important problem isn't always the most important problem to them. So an effort to communicate is very important. Communicate with regard to their needs.
Let's take another phone call. Go ahead, your question, please.
Yes, I have a sister with cystic fibrosis, and she's doing really great. But what I was wondering is how is the medical research going on this, and do you anticipate that a cure will be forthcoming within the next, 10 or 20 years?
Well, I wish I could say for sure that a cure would be forthcoming in 10 or 20 years. We think that the treatments that people are contemplating and will be testing within the next decade, we think that those things may approach a cure. To actually cure the disease, though, is going to require something that's beyond present capability. However, it's possible.
Katie, you mentioned your little girl. How old is your little girl now?
She's 4 in June.
4. Do you worry about her? Does she carry the genes?
She will definitely be a carrier, but we had her tested at 6 weeks. She does not have CF.
And so she doesn't have any of the health risks or problems?
She's perfectly healthy.
How do you think you will treat or teach her about what it is to be a carrier? What does that mean?
Well, she's grown up with my treatments and my health problems, and she's learning to understand that now.
So she probably knows a lot about it for a 4-year-old, huh?
Yes, I think she'll be, as she becomes an adult, I think she'll be aware.
And would you recommend to her or hope that she doesn't marry another person who carries the gene?
They're becoming able now to test for carriers, and I would hope that she would, her fiancé or whatever would be tested, and then that she could make her own decisions.
Let's take another phone call. Go ahead, your question or comment this morning.
Yes. Do these people usually die because of their pulmonary problems?
Dr. Nielsen?
Yes, that is almost 100% of the cases. The people with cystic fibrosis will die of chronic lung disease. And the lung disease that they develop is very much like emphysema, except almost none of them smoke. This is the result of chronic infection. There are a few who die of liver failure and other complications, but lung disease is by far and away the major cause.
Okay, we need to take a break right here. When we come back, we're going to pick up our discussion on cystic fibrosis this morning.
Give us a call. Our phone number is easy. KSL Show. Focus will return in 2 minutes.
This morning, we're concentrating on cystic fibrosis, learning more about it. We'd like to hear from you this morning. Question or a comment, please call us at KSL Show, 575-7469.
Margaret Sundstrom joins us. She is the mother of 2 children who've had cystic fibrosis. Let's go to our phone lines right now. Go ahead with your question, please.
I had a question for Charles. I wanted to know if his friends treat him any differently once they know that he has this.
I don't think so. I think growing up, they definitely didn't. I had just the best friendships that anybody else has. And then meeting new friends now, I have a continuous cough always. And so I think I have to explain what that is. And a real friend understands. People that are just there to be there, they don't.
Do you find that most people know what cystic fibrosis is when you tell them? Or do they have to ask more questions about it?
I would say no, not too many people do know. Every now and then somebody does. But I would say 8 out of 10 people don't.
Do we find that often, that the general public just doesn't know much about it? That it's something we...
Yes, I think that's very true, and it's amazing when you consider that how many carriers there are. And there are, 6 of us up here on the stage. There's a pretty good chance that one of us is, well, we know
there are a couple are.
There are a couple over here, we know that. But if we had 20 people in a room, there's a pretty good chance that one of those people is a carrier, especially in the state of Utah.
And likely doesn't know.
And you, as I say, you wouldn't know it.
You wouldn't know it.
No.
Absolutely not. We've never figured out what it is that made this one particular CF gene become so common in the Caucasian population.
Is there ever a chance that this is something that the gene can be damaged by other things, or is it just simply hereditary? I mean, there are a number of environmental forces and a variety of things that we say can cause chromosomal changes or damage.
Well, the genetics research, this group of many different mutations that cause CF, and this 30% of the total pool of mutations, is showing us that there's a fairly high mutation rate in the CF gene. We have not, no one that I know of at this point has identified a brand new mutation in the population. But I suspect that at some point we will find someone who had a new mutation. In order for it to be manifest, though, you'd not only have to have a mutation, you'd also have to have had a parent, at least one parent, who's a carrier, so that the chances of finding case number 1 for that is very unlikely.
Okay, let's take another phone call. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm the mother of a 4-year-old CF patient, and she has started to become aware of the death around her of the other CF patients. And I was wondering if you guys could give me a little information, you know, how can I explain this to her in terms that she can understand and in ways that I can deal with?
Okay. Karen Miller?
The different age groups cope with death. And a 4-year-old really is not in a position. They are beginning to notice other things dying, but they still haven't grasped the fact that they are also mortal. And so by the time they're 10, they will be able to do that. And so your explanation needs to go sort of along with, and with the various phases of their development. And the professional people, we advise that you only tell the kids what they're asking. Don't try to make it too complicated, because it can really get into some big issues.
Margaret,
yeah.
Yeah, you've had experience with this. How do you prepare children?
Well, I think it's just in your family living. In our home, religion has been a big part of preparing my children. I think without that, it would have been very difficult. We would have had to just rely on the importance of love at the time, but we try to do and make them feel that they need to do all they can now to live as good as possible and to enjoy as much as possible.
Let's take another phone call. Go ahead with your question, please.
This is Mary from
down in Utah County. I'd like to ask the doctor or whoever's on the panel, why don't they have more telethons, bikes, running, and stuff to help the foundation with cystic fibrosis, like they do cancer and all this other stuff? We never hear about anything going for cystic fibrosis. I had a granddaughter that died a year and a half ago. She was 45 minutes before 19 years old. And never nothing's going on. But you hear cancer, you have AIDS, you have everything, but never no kind of a thing for cystic fibrosis. Why is this?
I guess cystic fibrosis isn't considered one of the glamour diseases right now, although I think it did get a fair amount of notoriety when the gene was isolated, simply because that was such an incredible achievement. But the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation actually has been very, very successful in fundraising, and in spite of major cutbacks in the federal government for research funding, the funding for cystic fibrosis research has really gone extremely well. And the CF Foundation, I don't remember the exact numbers, but something on the order of $20 million last year was raised around the country for basic research directed at finding the cause and cure for cystic fibrosis.
And you mentioned that you're going to the legislature seeking some additional help as well. You plan on it?
Well, we've talked to the legislature, to some committee members, a little bit about possible screening programs. That may become a little more difficult because of some of the problems that have developed in the genetic issue and the ability to screen easily. But we do have good support from our local foundation. There is a state foundation here that has fundraisers. They tend to be in communities. There is a walkathon. There are bowl-a-thons. There are all kinds of fundraisers, fun runs that go on all the time. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had a bachelor bid that raised $20,000 or more for CF research.
We've run out of time. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us this morning and shedding a little light on this disease that is known very little about right now. Appreciate you being here.
And now, if you haven't done so already, please take a moment to vote on today's phone poll. What do you think about paying money for a movie and then watching a commercial or two? Does it bother you, or is it a good form of entertainment before the movie begins? What do you think?
Should commercials be shown in movie theaters? Yes, 575-7750. No, 575-7751. When we come back, we'll find out what's happening in the news.
Two of Washington, D.C.'s most popular tourist attractions need some repair work. We'll tell you why when we come back.